You're standing in a hallway made of jade and gold, breathing air thick with incense and something darker fear. The silk beneath your feet costs more than a lifetime of labor. Somewhere behind these crimson doors, a woman in her 70s is being attended to by men young enough to be her great-grandsons. One of them is trembling. His name is Zhang Yitzi, and he knows what happened to the last favorite who displeased her. They found him in pieces scattered across 3 provinces as a warning. Tonight, Zhang watches another young man emerge from her chambers, clothes disheveled, eyes glazed with exhaustion. He's been in there for 6 hours, and Zhang realizes with cold clarity he's no longer her favorite. He's already dead. He just doesn't know it yet. Before we descend into this world most historians try to bury, I'd love to know where are you watching from right now. It genuinely amazes me that a story this dark, from 13 centuries ago, can reach someone reading this today, wherever you are in the world. This is China, 697 AD. The woman behind those doors is Wu Zetian, and she holds a title no woman in 4,000 years of Chinese civilization ever claimed. Huangdi Emperor, not Empress, not consort, not regent, emperor. And the men waiting in that hallway, they're part of something the official histories tried to erase, a government department whose sole function was recruiting, examining, training, and delivering attractive young men to her bed. Court records, fragments that survived the purges, suggest over 3,000 candidates passed through this system during her decades in power. What you're about to hear isn't mythology. It's documented in the Zizi Tengzhan, corroborated by Tang Dynasty court records, and whispered about in private letters that aristocrats never meant to preserve. The reason most people don't know this story is simple. The men who wrote history after her death had every reason to destroy it. A woman who ruled like this, who used men as emperors, used concubines, who maintained power through pleasure and terror in equal measure, she violated every rule they'd built their world upon. So they tried to erase her. They failed. Let me take you back to where this begins, because Wu Zetian didn't start as an emperor. She started as a concubine ranked Chiron 5th tier, bottom of the hierarchy. One girl among hundreds competing for an emperor's attention that would likely never come. She was 14 years old when Emperor Taizong selected her for his harem in 637. Most girls at her rank never shared the emperor's bed even once. They aged in gilded captivity, then were shipped to Buddhist convents when he died, their youth wasted waiting for a glance that never arrived. Wu Zetian shared Taizong's bed perhaps 5 times in 12 years. But while other concubines complained about neglect, she used those years differently. She learned to read classical Chinese better than most court officials. She memorized the histories of previous dynasties, studying exactly which concubines had risen and how they'd managed it. She cultivated relationships with the eunuchs, who controlled everything: the schedules, the access, the whispers that reached the emperor's ear. And she watched Crown Prince Li Zi during his visits to his dying father. He was 21, sheltered, inexperienced. She was 25, trained in the arts of attraction, and hungry for something more than a lifetime in a convent. The seduction happened in stages glances while the dying emperor slept. Whispered conversations in corridors, then a meeting in a garden pavilion she'd arranged through carefully placed bribes. By the time Emperor Taizong died in 649, the crown prince was obsessed with her. He wanted her so badly that he violated one of Confucianism's most sacred prohibitions, a son taking his father's woman. Within 2 years, she was back in the palace as his concubine. But concubine wasn't enough. 2 women stood between Wu Zetian and the title of Empress. What she did to eliminate them reveals exactly what kind of monster she was willing to become. She gave birth to a daughter. She waited until Empress Wang, her primary rival, came to visit the infant. And then, moments before Wang arrived, Wu Zetian placed her hands over her own baby's face and held them there until the tiny body went still. She arranged the infant to look peaceful. She hid where she could watch. When Empress Wang approached the cradle and found the child dead, Wu Zetian emerged screaming accusations of murder. Her husband, Emperor Gaozong, believed every word. Empress Wang was deposed and imprisoned along with another rival, consort Xiao Wu. Zishang visited them personally in their cell. She ordered their hands amputated first, lowly one joint at a time, so they would feel everything. She watched as the blades fell. She watched as they screamed. Then she ordered their feet removed. And finally, she had their limbless torsos stuffed into ceramic wine vats filled with vinegar. The acid kept them alive, but in constant screaming agony. They couldn't escape. They could only float in that burning liquid and wait for death. Empress Wang died on the third day. Consort Zhao lasted until the fifth. Wu Zetian reportedly visited them multiple times, asking how they were enjoying their accommodations. This is who we're dealing with. A woman who took visible pleasure in the suffering of anyone who stood in her way. And the pattern she established with these two women, control through cruelty. Power maintained by making examples would repeat itself for the next 50 years with the men who would serve her. By 655, Wu Zetian was empress. By 660, her husband had suffered multiple strokes, leaving him barely functional. She ruled in his name while he drooled on his throne. When he died in 683, she controlled the succession completely. Her son Zhongzong became emperor. He lasted exactly 2 months before she had him dragged from the throne and exiled to a remote province where he would spend 14 years under armed guard. She installed her younger son Rizong as replacement, but this time she didn't bother with pretense. He was confined to the inner palace, forbidden from meeting anyone, a puppet whose only function was making her rule appear legitimate. Then, in 690, she dispensed with the fiction entirely. She forced Rezong to abdicate. She declared a new dynasty, the Zhou, and she assumed the title of Huangdi herself. She was 66 years old. She would rule for another 15 years, and throughout those years she maintained appetites that shocked everyone who witnessed them. Which brings us to the crane service. The official name was Kangfang the Peacock Office. Palace servants called it the crane service because cranes symbolized longevity and vital energy, and the empress wanted both. The department was established sometime in the early 680s, when Wu Zetian was approaching 60, and her husband could no longer satisfy her. Its sole function was identifying, recruiting, examining, and training attractive men for her personal use. The system they developed was disturbingly thorough. Scouts traveled across the empire, searching for candidates. Provincial governors received confidential instructions to report any unusually attractive men meeting specific criteria. Height between 5'7" and 6'1", age between 18 and 35, refined features. Athletic but not bulky build, and most importantly physical dimensions exceeding normal proportions in ways officials learned to evaluate through mandatory health inspections. Getting reported was just the beginning. What came next eliminated most candidates. Men transported to the capital faced examination by senior eunuchs specifically trained for this evaluation. The candidates stripped completely. The eunuchs measured everything: height, shoulders, chest, waist, thighs. They examined skin for blemishes, inspected teeth, hair, fingernails. They checked breath and body odor. Then came the assessment that actually mattered. They evaluated intimate dimensions in resting state, measuring and recording results. They induced arousal using visual stimuli, physical manipulation, whatever produced measurable response, and measured again. They timed stamina. They tested recovery periods. They evaluated capacity for sustained and repeated performance. Everything was documented in files that became permanent records. Most men failed at this stage, and what happened to failures tells you how seriously the Empress took secrecy. Wang Qing was a young scholar from Shandong, reported to the crane service after a provincial official noticed him during examinations. He was 24, handsome, educated, confident. He arrived at the capital certain his future was assured. The examination revealed problems. His dimensions were adequate but not exceptional. His stamina acceptable but not impressive. The verdict was devastating, suitable for secondary service but not for imperial attention. The crane service didn't release rejected candidates. They knew too much. Wang Qing was offered a choice: accept a minor posting in a distant frontier garrison and never speak of what occurred, or face consequences. He accepted the posting. He was sent near the Tibetan border. He died of fever within 2 years. Whether that fever was natural or assisted was never determined. It probably doesn't matter. Dead men don't talk either way. Men who passed examinations faced interviews about their willingness to serve, however, the Empress required. They were informed that disclosure meant execution for themselves and their entire extended family's parents, siblings, cousins, everyone. They were asked if they understood. Everyone said yes. What else could they say? Then came training. Senior eunuchs who had observed imperial intimate practices for decades served as instructors. They taught techniques using diagrams and wooden models. They conducted practice sessions with palace women assigned to evaluate progress and report deficiencies. The training emphasized endurance above everything else. The Empress required sessions lasting hours. A man who couldn't maintain performance was useless. A man who finished before she was satisfied would not be summoned again. The eunuchs taught breathing techniques to delay completion. They taught mental methods for redirecting focus. They taught how to read her responses and adjust pace accordingly. They taught positions that maximized her pleasure while minimizing their own stimulation. Trainees who couldn't master these skills were assigned to secondary duties and warned never to speak of why they'd failed. Court records suggest approximately 3,000 candidates passed through this system over its years of operation. Not all served the Empress directly. Many failed examinations. Others were assigned to princesses or maintained as reserves. But hundreds certainly rotated through her chambers during her decades of power. And here's what made Wu Zetian different from male emperors who maintained harems. She didn't simply use these men, she played with them. She enjoyed watching them compete. She took visible pleasure in their desperation when her favor shifted elsewhere. Let me tell you about Zhu Wai, because his story captures everything about how she operated. His original name was Feng Xiaobao. In 685, he was selling cosmetics on the streets of Luyangno. Education, no connections, no future. What he had was physical equipment that had become legendary in his neighborhood. Women discussed it openly. Men noticed it in bathhouses. These rumors reached Princess Taiping, the Empress's daughter, who had developed considerable expertise in identifying men her mother might enjoy. The princess sent a servant to verify the reports. The servant confirmed everything and more. Princess Taiping had Feng Xiaobao brought to her residence and examined him personally. Not just his dimensions, but his capacity for sustained performance. She kept him for 3 days, running him through scenarios that would simulate actual service conditions. Satisfied, she bathed him, dressed him in fine clothing, and presented him to her mother as a gift. Wu Zetian examined him in her private chambers. The examination lasted several hours. She found him more than satisfactory. Within days, she'd set arrangements in motion. The problem was access men, who weren't eunuchs, couldn't enter the inner palace freely. So she had him ordained as a Buddhist monk, gave him the religious name Wai, and appointed him abbot of White Horse Temple, one of China's holiest sites. Now he could enter the palace any time to provide spiritual counsel. For 6 years, he was her primary favorite. He visited her chambers almost daily, arriving in late afternoon and remaining past midnight. The Empress rewarded him beyond imagination. Estates generating enormous income, command of armies fighting Tibetan raiders, noble titles placing him among the highest aristocracy, jewelry and silk exceeding what princes could afford. But she also enjoyed tormenting him. She would mention other men in his presence, commenting on their attractiveness, wondering aloud whether their abilities might match their appearance. She would dismiss him early some nights without explanation, leaving him to wonder whether another man was being summoned after his departure. She gave gifts to other favorites where Zhu Wai could see them, watching his face contort with jealousy while he struggled to maintain composure. This was entertainment for her. The mighty abbot who commanded armies, reduced to desperate anxiety over whether he still pleased an elderly woman. She held absolute power over him, and she made certain he never forgot it. His arrogance with others grew accordingly. He arrived late to ceremonies and shoved ministers aside. He interrupted state business to deliver trivial messages. He insulted aristocrats whose families had served the empire for generations. During one ceremony in 688, Zhu Wai pushed through assembled officials to take a position near the Empress. Su Liangxi, the highest civil official in the empire, objected. Zhu Wai struck him in the face. The elderly minister fell. Blood poured from his nose. The entire court watched in silence. The Empress did nothing. Su Liangxi picked himself up, apologized to Zhu Wai for giving offense, and resumed his position with blood still dripping down his face. A man who had served 3 emperors with distinction, humiliated by a former street vendor because that vendor shared the Empress's bed. Zhu Wai believed he was irreplaceable. He didn't understand that the Krang service had files on hundreds of men who could provide exactly what he provided. Then the Zhang brothers arrived. Zhang Yizi and Zheng Changzong were approximately 22 and 20 years old when Princess Taiping discovered them. Unlike Zhu Wai, selected purely for physical attributes, the Zhang brothers combined beauty with education, artistic talent, and sophistication. Zhang Yizi had features poets compared to carved jade. Zheng Changzong played the jade flute beautifully, wrote calligraphy that collectors sought, and could discuss philosophy with genuine insight. Princess Taiping understood her aging mother now wanted more than physical satisfaction. The Empress had complained about Zhu Wai's crude manners and limited conversation. The Zhang brothers were young enough to be her grandsons, but sophisticated enough to treat her as a desirable woman rather than an elderly patron purchasing their attention. They praised her poetry with specific observations, showing they'd actually read it. They listened to her stories with apparent fascination. They made her laugh. The Empress began summoning them together, both brothers, simultaneously coordinating their attentions according to her direction. They remained overnight multiple times weekly, sometimes 3 or 4 consecutive nights, and she made certain Zhu Waiyi knew about it. She didn't simply transfer her attention, she displayed it. She had the Zhang brothers accompany her to public events where Zhu Waiyi would be present. She touched them in his viewage, adjusting their clothing, brushing hair from their faces, demonstrating physical intimacy she no longer showed him. She assigned the brothers apartments adjacent to her own chambers, forcing Zhu Waiyi to pass their doors when he came for his increasingly rare summons. This was cruelty refined to art. She wanted him to suffer. She wanted to watch. For 3 weeks this continued. His mental state deteriorated visibly. Palace servants reported him muttering to himself in corridors. He stopped eating regularly. He alternated between desperate attempts to regain favor and furious outbursts that alarmed everyone who witnessed them. Then came the night that would end everything. Zhu Waiyi gathered followers from White Horse Temple. He armed them with torches and oil. He marched through dark streets to the Mingtangda Sacred Hall of Light the Empress had built as the spiritual center of her dynasty. A wooden tower rising nearly 300 feet, visible from every corner of the capital, containing treasures accumulated over decades, and he burned it to the ground. The flames lasted 3 days. What had taken years and fortunes to build was destroyed in one night of jealous rage. Here's the part that reveals her complete control. She didn't execute him. She summoned him to her chambers. He arrived expecting death. Instead, she berated him for his weakness, his childish inability to accept that she would enjoy other men as she pleased. She made him kneel before her while she catalogued his failures, and then she forgave him. She permitted him back into her bed. She let him believe his position might be restored. This was her particular pleasure, the absolute power to destroy him. Wielded not through destruction, but through mercy that demonstrated her complete control. She could have killed him. She chose to keep him alive and suffering instead. But his position never recovered. His summons grew rare. His influence evaporated. In 695, his frustration exploded into violence. He encountered Zhang Yetzi in a palace corridor and attacked him, beating him savagely before guards intervened. Zhang Yetzi's face was bloodied, his arm was broken. He would walk with a slight limp for the rest of his life. This time, forgiveness didn't come. The Empress summoned Princess Taiping and gave instructions. Palace servants cornered Zhu Waiyi in an isolated courtyard. They beat him with wooden staves until his bones shattered. They continued until he stopped moving. They burned his body. The man who had burned her sacred hall was himself reduced to ashes. The abbot, who had struck down her chief minister, died begging for mercy from palace servants. But the Zhang brothers were far from her only companions during these years. Let me tell you about some of the others, because each one reveals a different facet of how she wielded power. About an empress who lived exactly as she chose, for as long as her body allowed, and answered to absolutely no one.